This is the February 23rd. Is the tape going?
Yes, it is.
Okay. February 23rd, 2022. Council, Mayor, Manager Budget Retreat for fiscal year 23. And we are doing this by Zoom. And we have an agenda. And we have all council members present. It is a public meeting, but we have all council members present, thank goodness. And we have two members of the recently created budget committee, and that is Ari. Ari, how do you say your last name, Ari?
Heiko.
Heiko. There, okay. Are there two? Oh, and there's Naveed. So we have three members, Naveed, Nakui. And Stephen Welker. So I welcome everybody and thank you for taking some time away from your schedule today to get on this call. Before I begin, I just want to thank everybody for all their best wishes and very kind words. I actually have you can't see it, I have the bouquet from the town council behind me. Can you see it?
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry about that. There it is, right? So thank you very much for thinking of me and my family and Molly. It's been really rough. So forgive me if I do not stay focused. And I am having, for that reason, Barbara to really lead us through this. We actually went through something like this about 3 years ago when Andrea was here. She did that. So I reserve the right to jump in, call point of order or anything else, but I'm going to put this in the trusted hands of Barb. So Barb.
Thank you. I'm great. I'm going to share my screen, have a presentation, so we'll kind of go in and out of that. You can just give me a minute. Let's see. Okay, can everybody see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, good, thank you.
Okay.
Kind of wanted to start with just what we're hoping to get out of this evening's work session. And like the mayor, I thank everyone for their time and particularly for our three members of the budget work group for joining us. Kind of our objectives tonight are to share what budgetary information we have available at this time. Just to make it clear, we are not presenting a tentative budget. There's still a lot of work to be done over the next couple of weeks. But Kaki and I did want to share with you the information that we have in hand. Also wanted to spend some time this evening talking about the reserve accounts, our capital budget accounts, get a preliminary sense from the council in terms of what you would like to do in terms of employee wage adjustments, have some discussion about the new position that Kaki and I are proposing, which is currently titled an assistant town manager / town clerk position. And also certainly give the council a chance to weigh in on what your budget priorities are so that as Kaki and I are putting the budget together, we have some sense of what's important to you. And then lastly, but certainly not least, want to make sure that we have a budget calendar going forward and to establish those dates. So kind of where do things stand now? As I mentioned, we are in the process of still developing some of our revenue and expenditure projections. I did reach out to the Arboretum Committee and the Archives Committee, and both of those committees have submitted their budget request. Certainly as we go along, Jerry Lee or Mario, you might want to offer some comments about that since you're the liaison to those committees. As I mentioned, we have three members of the newly formed budget work group who are here with us this evening, and they seem to be hitting the ground running, and they will have their first meeting next Monday, February 28th at 8:30 over at Town Hall. They elected to meet in person. So kind of starting with some of our revenues and kind of what that picture is looking like. Real property. Yes.
Sorry, I meant to just chime in just a minute earlier than that, so I wasn't interrupting your flow, but there were
no problem.
Two things I wanted to make mention. One is that actually, while you and I will be presenting the FY23 budget to council the shift in this year is that with this new budget committee, they will be drafting up the first formal budget for our review, and then if whatever changes happen after that, we present to the council, and of course, budget committee members would be present to help take questions if it was necessary. But I don't want to leave them out of this.
Sure.
They'll be doing the first crack, so
Right.
just want to recognize that. The second thing I want to make mention of is I haven't had the chance to actually give it 100% confirmation, but next Tuesday is when I am hoping to be meeting, and Barb too, and even the budget members, if they're there, to meet with over Zoom the University of Maryland Students PALS program, who are going to be taking on a finance project for us to make user friendly and document some of the modeling tools that we created over the last few years, so that it becomes more easily workable and used, updated, revised, whatever, by future staff, so that I'm not the only one who knows how to work it or use it or infer from it. So hopefully, I know it's sort of springing it on at the last minute, because I didn't know the Monday meeting was a definite thing either for the budget meeting, but maybe the budget meeting members can either move their meeting to Tuesday. We think it starts at 6 o'clock, or be able to attend 2 meetings in a row, which, is a lot to ask for. That's all. Just put that in your hat. Okay.
Right. And thank you for clarifying that, Kaki. Obviously, the budget work group is something that's new during my tenure with the town, so it's helpful to have that information in hand. And also for the town council members, if at any point you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to jump in. I'd like to keep this as informal as we can and make it as productive as we can for you. So
Just real quick,
sure.
quick question before we get in the flow. I assume we can get a copy, the council can get a copy of this deck, but just wanted to check.
Sure, I'll be
Yeah,
happy to
okay.
send that to you. And my thought, Stephen, was with the minutes from this meeting. Usually I find it fairly helpful just to take any presentation and just attach them to the minutes and incorporate them by reference. So I'll do that as well. So that way
Awesome.
people in the community have access to it.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sure. So starting with kind of revenues, and some of this may be old hat for the town council members, but just for anyone who ends up watching this, or maybe for our new budget work group, wanted to talk a little bit just about real property tax, the real property tax base. Municipalities in Maryland, unlike some other parts of the country where I've worked, are very, very limited in terms of how they can raise money. So pretty much as you go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction in Maryland, there's a lot of commonality in terms of where they get their funding from. And one of the primary revenue sources for virtually all municipalities in Maryland is real property tax revenue. The percentage of town revenues, it will vary obviously from year to year, but roughly it's about 38% of all of our revenues. I'm sure all of you know, as homeowners, all town property was reassessed in calendar year 2020. Those new market values were put in place effective January 1st of 2021. And then basically by Maryland law, any increase in new market values get phased in over the next 3 tax years. So that's Maryland state law. So FY 2023 will actually be the second year of that 3-year phase-in period. I think everyone is likely familiar with the constant yield tax rate certification, but just for those of you who are not, it is basically a process that is overseen by the Maryland Department of Assessments and Taxation. Basically, they look at every municipality's, and Kaki, feel free to jump in here, but every municipality's assessable base. They then look at the property tax that entity levied in the prior year. So in our case, we're going into FY 2023. The state looked at FY 2022. They do a mathematical calculation, factoring in some estimates of new construction, whether that was a partial or entirely during the course of the fiscal year. And then they also include some estimates of abatements and deletions. And typically that number is going to relate to any kind of taxpayer appeals and that might be granted. So that's sort of the mathematical formula. They then basically look at what they calculate what is referred to as the constant yield tax rate. And this is, as the name would somewhat imply, the tax rate that local government would levy that would keep the revenues they get from real property taxes at the same level as the prior year. Jackie's nodding her head, so I think I managed to explain it correctly. And part of the reason this is done is certainly as property values increase, an entity can keep its tax rate the same, but get more money, depending on certain factors related to your jurisdiction. If a local government chooses to levy a tax rate that is above that constant yield tax rate, the state has a process where you have to have certain public notice requirements in the newspaper. You have to hold public hearings. So it's a fairly standard formula that happens every single year. So we have received the constant yield tax rate certification from the state. So this will be the process that is applicable to fiscal year 2023. Interestingly enough, and Kaki and I, go ahead, Kaki, jump right in.
I was talking and I realized I was muted, so you never heard me. Just make a little nuance difference there that, the public hearings and all are based on a certain amount.
Right.
It's not the constant yield per se, the constant yield that we might be above. It's the amount of money that we would receive if we held to our current local tax rate, and what money revenues we receive from that based on in comparison. So I think the window is like 25,000 or something.
That's
You
correct.
can't if you make more than that compared to the constant, then we have to have a public hearing and we have to adjust, or we don't, but we have to have a public hearing about it.
Yeah, and you're correct, Kaki. Actually, I was unaware of the $25,000 threshold until I came to Garrett Park because every place I worked was subject to this whole process.
Right, and we're almost always exempt, thank goodness.
Yes, it makes it a lot easier, I can assure you of that. So basically, based on the information that we got from the state, and once again, there are a lot of estimates and projections that the state factors into this. But they are, interestingly enough, projecting that Garrett Park's net assessable real property base will actually decrease from fiscal 22 to 23 by 3.54 million, which is about 1.2%. The primary reason for that appears to be that the state is projecting that there will be $11 million in abatements granted, and that would be due to taxpayers who file an appeal and are successful in that appeal. So once again, I think this is sort of some guesswork on the state's part, but they're doing the best that they can. And looking back at what they estimated for fiscal year 2022 and what actually happened, Garrett Park's property values were actually higher than what the state would have estimated when they did the constant yield tax rate certification. Kaki, I know you do a lot of work in this area, so I don't know if that's actually the typical pattern that happens, but it certainly seemed to be the case for fiscal year 2022, is that the state underestimated what our base would be. Just as a
Generally do, you're right.
Yeah, and like I say, they're estimating, a lot of taxpayer appeals. I'm not working in the Department of Assessments, but it would seem like when reassessment actually happened, that many taxpayers likely would have taken the opportunity to appeal for fiscal year 2022, because that's when their values actually really probably jumped more significantly. Just as a reminder, our current local tax rate is 0.2045 per $100 of assessed value. Kind of tagging on to Kaki's comments, the state's calculated constant yield tax rate is 0.2070. So this would be the first time in my career in Maryland where I've ever worked someplace whose tax rate was actually less than the constant yield. Before I move on, just any questions about property taxes, because it is such an important part of our budget. Okay. Our second largest revenue source, which once again is pretty common among municipalities in Maryland, are local income taxes. Counties in Maryland have the opportunity to levy what is often referred to as a piggyback income tax. So it's basically a piggyback on the state income tax. Municipalities by state law get 17% of the revenues that the county generates from that piggyback income tax based on residency. It varies once again from year to year, but approximately 35% of the town's revenues come from this local income tax. I know that there has been some kind of chatter in the community sometimes about, how we get more revenues than what we budget for. That's certainly the direction that anyone would want it to go into versus the reverse. But in looking back at just some of the past couple of years of the town's budget and actual receipts, probably the area where we have often come in higher would be income taxes. And I can assure you without any hesitation that there is not a town manager or a town finance director in Maryland who doesn't struggle with what to project for income taxes. There's just a lot of nuances to it. In terms of where we stand, I think our last town council meeting, we had the January financial report. I don't know if anyone had noticed this, but as of now, as of the end of January, our fiscal year 2022 income tax receipts compared to the same time period for last year are actually lagging. We are down by just a little over 47,000. We are expecting to get another income tax payment any day now. Oftentimes it's already here, so we'll see if the February distribution changes that pattern. But as of now, once again, on a year-to-year basis, we are actually down in income taxes. I think it's too early to panic, but I certainly would like to see it in the other direction at this point. Just some other revenues.
Hey, Barb, just
Yes,
real
sure.
quick, sorry. Can you go back? Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Okay.
So is this just timing versus versus what might be perceived as a overall less potential for receipts overall in Garrett Park, or is it just timing of when we get back money from the? I mean, it seems like a lot of money. I don't know if it is in the scheme of things. I mean, $48,000 seems like a good chunk of change to be pacing after 1 month. So, oh, not 1 month, but I mean over half the fiscal year, I should say. But
yeah, and it's a great question, Mario, and I wish I had the answer for you, but that's the complication of income taxes. A lot of it depends on when people actually file, when their returns get processed. And the state tries to give us some guidance. Normally, when we get the distribution from the state, there's a particular person in the State Department of Revenue who will try to give you some guidance and explanation of things. Waiting for that to see what she says,
Okay.
but I think that's the big question mark.
Okay, so some of it could be timing. It's not that we're
right.
Okay.
That's what I'm hoping it is. Because our income tax revenues, going back several years, I'm working with our accountant. I had her kind of spreadsheet for me, the last couple of years of all of our revenues and all of our expenditures just to look for trends. And I was really surprised to actually see this. We've been fairly consistent in our income tax revenue. So that is my hope, is it's just a timing question.
I have another question if it's okay.
Sure.
I think I'm curious, a lot of times it's been pointed out to residents in the past to make sure that you list Garrett Park on your tax revenue. But I noticed we've had a lot of newer residents. It seems like the last couple of years more so than the previous few years to that. I wonder, is what happens if somebody is new and perhaps doesn't know and don't put it on there? Does the state typically catch that and correct it, or are we kind of stuck if it's not on there?
I'm going to guess more stuck, because the state, if you think about the volume that they're, having to, of information they're looking at and trying to sort it out, it's kind of important that people actually note their residency correctly, not only for income taxes, but also for highway user revenue. But I think, Stephen, your point is a good one, and I'm actually getting ready to submit my copy to the Bugle. It's due tomorrow, so I will make sure that I include something in that, and it might actually be worth sending something out via GPML in the town forum, just as a reminder to people as well.
Maybe it might even be that our house may have even forgotten one of these years. So yeah, it sounds like it's really critical. So
it is. Any other questions from anybody? Okay. Just some other revenues, and these are not necessarily huge revenue sources, but at least I wanted to mention them. We get.
I think Kaki's talking. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kaki. You're still muted, Khaki. There
I
you go.
know, I'm just terrible. I was just going to agree with Stephen and say, yeah, that was a great point because we are at the whim. There is
Yeah.
nobody other than our own town and council and office to remind residents to
Right.
check that box. So nobody else will do it. We have to remind ourselves and one another. Yeah. Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah. We get some money from highway user revenues. State just sent a letter last month, basically giving updated estimates for both 2022 and 23. For 23, we're looking at maybe about $1,200 or $1,300. The state will basically give another round of letters coming up fairly soon. So a little bit more from there. The use of these monies is restricted by state law. So it's typically used by municipalities for road maintenance. Larger local governments who have transportation systems can also use it for that. Municipal tax duplication is money that we get from Montgomery County. This is basically to essentially kind of reimburse municipalities, if you will, for services that they're providing rather than the county. And essentially it's kind of almost a tax duplication, property tax offset is what some people refer to it as. We typically don't get information on the source until the county executive submits his budget, which is generally March 15th. Currently, Garrett Park receives a payment only for road maintenance. This is an issue that I did a lot of work on in both Tacoma Park and Rockville. And Garrett Park residents do pay the special district tax for parks to park and planning. And we do have, as you know, one town park, which is Cambria Park. So I have sent an email about 2 weeks ago to the county executive office asking at least if we could have this matter reviewed and to see if we might possibly be eligible to receive a park maintenance payment from the county. So that's just pending, but at least nothing ventured, nothing gained, I guess, would be my approach to this. We did sign a new. Yes, Khaki?
If I may, this is Jerry Lee.
Oh, sure, Jerry.
Yeah, if you're going to do that, I think, technically the town has also the playground at the community center, which
Okay.
is a town park for all intents and purposes,
Okay.
even though it's, used by the preschool during a portion of the weekdays. But also we own a portion of Waverly Park, and then there's that tiny park adjacent to the pool that is generally known as the dog park. So we actually do own more than just Cambria Park.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, I did find a memorandum of understanding that was signed with Park and Planning. I couldn't tell you what the year is, but I think it relates to part of Waverly Park. And by that memorandum, the town sort of waived its right to any type of payment. But at the same time, Park and Planning assumed the responsibility for capital investment into the park. So that one I was aware of, not the other two. So thank you for that, Jerry.
Porcupine Woods as well, which
Okay.
quasi park.
Yeah, and the way that Park and Planning, that this issue tends to get looked at for park maintenance payments is they look at a park that's in a municipality. They look at how that park might be classified under Park and Planning system. They have a whole system of how they classify their parks, and then they'll render a decision. So, like I say, I've submitted the request to the county executive's office, and Ken Hartman in particular, and he is exploring that. So I'll certainly keep you posted on that.
I've got a question on that.
Sure.
Specifically, does that money come with any restrictions?
It does not. Once again, it's really, to kind of put it in layman's terms, it's really viewed as reimbursing a municipality for services that the county would otherwise provide, and trying to somewhat address double taxation issues. So there are no restrictions on it. It's just a general use reimbursement.
But but that would be for a park, and what I'm wondering is, in cases of parks, does that mean it's open to all comers, or are we still allowed to, if necessary, do some things like put restrictions or require some type of permit to use, that sort of thing?
I don't think there would be any restrictions, Phil, on it that I'm aware of. I know Tacoma Park got a park maintenance payment. How they used that money was up to Tacoma Park, but they did have a dog park that I recall was fenced. And basically you had to be a member to participate. So not to the best of my knowledge.
Okay, great.
We signed a new post office lease that went into effect February 1st. So we'll be getting a little bit more money per year from that lease. It's $6,200 specifically. And then lastly, I think you all probably remember this, we should be getting the second tranche of our ARPA funds in fiscal year 2023. I think the payment should be received in July of 2022 of this calendar year. Any questions about revenues before I move on from anyone? Okay. Switching a little bit to just kind of our operating expenses, not a lot of information available at this point, unfortunately. Good news, I guess, is that we'll be making our final debt service payment on the Penn Place bond. That final payment is scheduled to be made in May of 2022. And in this year's budget, we have roughly $62,000 budgeted for debt service. So that payment will go away next fiscal year. We do participate in the county health insurance plan, which I think is great because there's certainly some economies of scale with health insurance. The rates are basically established January 1st. So our accountant did just inform me that we did see a 5.3% increase as of January 1st for our employee health insurance. By comparison, the 2021 increase was less than 1%. But I will tell you that any kind of health insurance increase that's in a single digit is something to be really grateful for. So I think that's good news. In terms of looking ahead to 2023, and we'll be talking about this a little bit more in the evening, Kaki and I are recommending that we add a new staff position in next year's budget, specifically an assistant town manager, town clerk position. And I'll kind of defer any further comments on that until we get to that part of the agenda. I'm kind of switching gears a little bit on you. I wanted to spend just a few minutes tonight talking about general fund unallocated reserve policies. The general fund, I think as most of you know, is basically your kind of operating fund that covers your day-to-day expenses as opposed to capital. There is an organization called the Government Finance Officers Association. It is a professional association of financial experts who provide a lot of kind of best practice guidance. And one of their kind of best practice guidelines has to do with unallocated fund balance. And so this is money that's basically not restricted in any way. Their suggested guideline, and this is a minimum, there's a lot of factors that go into what each local government may decide to do, but their minimum guideline, regardless of your size as a municipality or local government, is that you should have an unallocated reserve or fund balance of no less than 2 months of operating revenues or no less than 2 months of operating expenditures. Included in the background materials for this meeting, was a survey that I did of just some neighboring jurisdictions. As you probably noticed, many of them do not have formal fund balance policies, but they do have sort of their rule of thumb guideline that they tend to follow when putting together their budget. And virtually all of those are generally have some level higher than what GFOA, would recommend as a minimum. Rockville, for example, has a 20% policy. Some of the smaller municipalities, surrounding us in Montgomery County have sort of informal rule of thumb guidelines that they follow of a 40% unallocated reserve. Some even went as high as a year or 18 months. I would say most municipalities don't go quite that high because they don't have the financial flexibility to do that. So just kind of looking into this issue, and I think this came up, I believe Stephen may have raised it at maybe the December council meeting, which was my first meeting with you all. And that's kind of what prompted me to sort of dig in a little bit into this issue. So as you all know, we have an operating reserve of $175,000. And essentially what Garrett Park has done, as opposed to some other municipalities, is the town has essentially chosen to sort of self-restrict, to set that money aside and to actually reserve it and restrict it. Just to note that we do certainly have some surplus funds available in other accounts outside of that operating reserve. Also included in your packet was just sort of an analysis I did of, kind of looking at our operating revenue history compared to that GFOA guideline. So this is just the last couple of years of our actual operating revenues. And these were taken from the June financial reports every year. So you'll sort of see on the left side, basically our actual operating revenues. Obviously 2022 is still in process, so that's a budgeted figure. Mathematically just kind of took those totals, divided them by 12 and said, okay, what would that look like if we were to set aside 2 months of operating revenues? And you can kind of see those numbers. They're all, ranging from about 237,000 to 253,000. Also did the same thing on our operating expense history. So you'll see once again, the operating expenses down the left, 2022 is the budgeted, what the monthly average is. And then basically, just kind of what, I'm sorry, it jumped a little bit. I was trying to make sure I could see my numbers. So I think whether we were to apply the GFOA revenue standard or the expense standard, 175,000 would not meet that 2-month minimum that GFOA is recommending. But once again, the town actually does have funds that are available should they be needed, and they're just not captured in that operating reserve.
When you say that, what do you mean about funds that are available?
What I would say, Phil, is we have excess cash. So, you have money that we have transferred to capital, for example. So what our accountant and I did, just to sort of, kind of take how the town has basically traditionally budgeted, is, treated these reserve accounts that I'm about to bring up, looked at the capital funds that have been transferred to capital and essentially considered those to be restricted for capital use. And then kind of looked at, when you look at the cash in our bank accounts, what's left once you take all those, reserves aside or restricted funds. And we've got about $400,000 in cash. So that's what I mean by saying there's some funds available. And certainly the transfers that, various councils have made to the capital account, those are funds that you've chosen to transfer to capital. There's nothing legally stopping you from transferring funds back from those capital accounts if that's what you wanted to do. Does that make sense, Phil? Does that help at all?
So basically, what we're talking about then is monies that have been reserved for uses in the capital accounts.
Correct.
Okay, makes sense.
So this is just, kind of what, this is from the January financial report. These are what the reserve funds look like at this point. So there's 175,000 that has been set aside for an operating reserve. Once again, I think one of the discussion points in just a few minutes will be, going into fiscal year 2023, do you want to raise that $175,000? The employee leave reserve is just a calculation that is required as part of the annual financial audit. Since that is something that could eventually be paid out, the auditors require you to essentially set up a reserve to make sure those funding is available. The Yendel Park Reserve has been at 50,000, I think, from its inception. Mary and I were talking a little bit about the security deposits. Obviously, we had some tenants previously. So this amount could probably actually be reduced because really the only tenant, currently who pays a security deposit, I believe, is Black Market. The archives funds are obviously donated funds specifically for that purpose. And then we sort of go down, these other accounts. Sanitation crew is just the donations we receive. That probably will zero out. I think checks have been cut already this month. The wind case reimbursement, I believe that has already been addressed, so that will probably come off your list as of July 1st of 2022. So I guess some of the kind of discussion points wanted to kind of talk about is, do you all want to give some consideration to increasing the amount of the operating reserve? Roughly on a revenue basis, it would need to be increased by about 75,000. On an expenditure basis, it's slightly less than that. And then my other question, and I've been kind of familiarizing myself with the Yendel Park Reserve, as I understand it, and anyone can please correct me if I misspeak. is that this money would be used to basically take down the structure itself, and then the property by deed appears to be restricted to sort of a passive, park use. The reason I wanted to raise the Yendel Park Reserve issue is that, I don't think $50,000 is going to do all that much in terms of taking a house down and probably even just restoring the grounds to basically sort of a passive park use. I'm not sure exactly where we are with that project and, what the timing is. But I did just want to raise the issue that it's likely that the $50,000 amount would be insufficient for the project as I understand it. So these are just really discussion points. At this point, I think I've talked enough. So I'm just going to kind of let you all talk a little bit about these issues. And, if there's any preliminary guidance that you'd like to give, that would be very helpful, I think. Kaki, is there anything you'd like to say initially, or?
I'm unmuted. No, no, I think nothing in addition, Barb. It's excellent, other than to maybe advocate that we have sufficient funds, I think, to be able to increase that exigency reserve that we have of 175, which we've maintained for the same amount for many years. And I think the research you did really does suggest that or recommend that we should increase it. And I think, so that's my stance for advocating that we should probably go up, increase that.
Barb, I want to say that this is excellent. Probably some of the most detail I've seen. My only question, and forgive me, this is a naive question. And by the way, I tend to agree with you, Kaki, on increasing the operating reserve. I just want to but just for some clarity, has it ever been a risk where we've, in terms of not having or getting, are we ever in a space where the operating reserve came close to netting out and some, zeroing out in it? I mean, where?
No, Maury, I think if I know what you're asking, no, we've never come into an emergency situation where we thought we would end up using it. It's really like if, there was a major catastrophe in town, something.
Sure.
And think about also, draw the corollary to your own, home budgets where, it's always advised that you keep a certain amount of liquid cash handy to be able to pay mortgages, future mortgages and stuff. This is what Barb's research has shown, is that we're probably under valuing where we are monthly. So on our reserve.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood. Yeah, no, I get it. I agree. I just want just for historical perspective, just to understand, was it ever a risk? And as far as the Entrance Park, I'm just going to put it out there. I don't have an opinion on this. I struggle with this. This has been out there for a while. I thought we had a conversation at some point in the last couple of years that we could not knock that house down. Wasn't that a conversation that we had at some point? No, Phil, no, I'm wrong. I mean, I could be making this up, so forgive me.
No, actually, we are obligated to knock it down. But that being said, I also heard recently, like in the last several months, that the family or somebody was going to hire a company to come in and disassemble a house, or bring in a company for purposes of salvaging as many building materials and so forth as they can get. And it would be interesting to find out if that's the case, because I do agree that we need to increase it. I've said that for a little while now, but that could make a big effect, could have a big effect, is what I'm trying to say, on the how much we should increase, because to go in there and pull everything out, remediate, if you will, plant grass and so forth, I think will cost all of that. The other thing is that we are restricted to only being able to build on the old building footprint. So in other words, wherever the house was, essentially we can build. To that end, I would like to suggest, we haven't done so already, that we get a survey, because once they tear the house down, it's going to be hard to establish where the house was.
Okay.
So we might consider a survey, unless, excuse me, the family's already has a somewhat recent or believable survey.
You're talking about a plat with property boundaries and a site plat. really, right? Site plan with a house and anything. Okay, I think that's a great idea. It's a really good idea, Phil.
Should be a
And
full,
hopefully, Steve.
sorry, it should be a full topography too, not just the boundary,
Mhm.
like a location real estate survey, but like a topography just to see if there's any stormwater effects or anything else that we need to
And
be.
there are.
Yeah.
There's a creek running through it.
Yeah.
Yes,
A
that's
river.
a good point. Yeah, yeah. And you have a Parks and Open Spaces committee now, Phil. So hopefully your group can be very involved in that, I would
Yeah.
think. Okay, I'm
Um,
going to mute. I'm muting.
No, I was gonna say, that's kind of up there on the list. I'm gonna be sending out a doodle poll here in the next few days to try and get something organized. And that's definitely one of the first things I'm gonna toss on their plate, is that we need to be prepared sooner rather than later. Although hopefully Barb will be able to provide a little bit more intelligence as to what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I did do a little bit of research of what Andrea had in the electronic files. There's certainly a legal description that is written up. I don't recall seeing any kind of survey in our records, but I'll double check that tomorrow. But certainly I don't believe there's anything like what's being suggested, like some kind of topographical survey. I know that doesn't exist, at least not in our records. Yes, any other thoughts on either of these issues from anyone?
Question about the general fund. I've always been sort of curious because it's a little bit different. I know like a small town versus
Mhm.
like the work I do on budgets at work where it's private industry.
Right.
But there seems to be a lot of things that I wonder if we're putting in operation that should really be more in the capital budget. So I'm wondering what that, say it's
Sure.
agreed to do 2 months out of 12 and hold that in reserve. Are there things that are kind of making that that fund larger than it really should be? Like say like the Arboretum, like yearly maintenance is maintenance of the Arboretum. Is that really a operating expense or is that a capital expense? So I'm curious, like if there aren't a handful of issues like that that maybe should be characterized separately or differently.
Yeah,
So,
I can share with you all at least what I've seen, and it will vary from city to city, but typically I would say kind of a general rule of thumb. And once again, I think it'll vary depending on the size of the community, but typically you're looking at an item that probably at least has a value, with a purchase value of like $10,000, and probably has a useful life of anywhere from 5 to 10, at least 5 years or beyond. So something like a computer, for example, a laptop, even a desktop computer these days, pretty much are considered to be obsolete in about 3 years. So when I was probably first starting out almost 36 years ago, you would probably have seen a lot of computers be considered capital items. These days, most cities will probably consider them to almost be expendable equipment or something categorized as that, just because their useful life in terms of depreciation is 3 years or less. I can go back through some of the items we have and see, Stephen, if there's anything that strikes me as being inappropriately classified, from capital to operating or even the other direction. Nothing has jumped out to me so far. I would say that, and Kaki might have to help me here with her vast knowledge, but certainly some of the equipment that I know, like the maintenance staff is asking for. There's a couple items that are like $3,000, $5,000. In my experience, that would probably be considered more of an operating expense than a capital, and I'm not really clear yet on kind of where the town has accounted for items such as that. Kaki, do you have any insight into that? I think you're muted, Kaki.
There we
There
go.
you go.
Actually, thanks, sorry. Yeah, actually, this kind of came up just recently in the most recent financial report, audited financial report. There was capital assets that were reported, and learned that some of these just go back way back to
Yeah.
years. People don't know when it was started, and it something Mary said that she would try to track down and see if there were any records, and I suggested even checking with Claire,
Yeah.
our archivist, to see because it's not really mentioned what in more detail that they are. Some of it is like dollar value, like, okay,
Right.
what do we have that would be worth this? But I would like to, I hope I answered some of that for you, but
Right.
so we can look back at the audit report, Barb, and see if there's
Okay.
a few things. There were a few things specifically called out. Some were the buildings, and then there was also Cambria Park was
Hmm.
also mentioned. But I want to just clarify a little bit more on the capital budget from my perspective from federal budgeting, that in this case, and I think, Barb, you've hit on it, you're going to hit on it, or you've tried to hit on it, that our capital budget has some of these line items are specific, and then some are just sort of vague, right?
Right.
Not real clear what the money is in there to be used for. There's been some town managers that are, or mayors that I've spoken with over the last several years about it, and some only budget in their capital budget very specific projects. That's all they have. We have a lot more, obviously, that are sort of nebulous. On the other hand, capital budgets are meant for anything, and I think the figure that, Barb, you threw out, about 10,000 or so, is probably a good one, but it's for anything that has a useful shelf life over time, depreciates, and that we would, as a community and an operating town, want to have monies in the system, if you will, to be able to replenish when we need to, when that useful life ends. So a lot, like Barb mentioned, the truck. I mean, there are things like that that you typically put into the capital budget that need to be replenished over time. And I don't know if I helped clarify on that point at all. But that goes to the heart of sort of something Barb was saying about projects being, we may need to be more specific, whether it's a project or whether it's a healthy expense that, will depreciate with and usefulness, and then we need to, replenish or replace.
Right.
Sorry.
Hey, Barb.
Yeah. Hi, Julie.
First of all, thank you, Khaki, for that further clarification. I just wanted to comment. First, I really appreciate the research that you did with GFOA and for the unallocated fund reserve, and I'm definitely in favor of increasing at least to the minimum and perhaps a little bit more once we look at our budget for the year. And then also I'm in agreement that we should go ahead and add more to the Yendell Park Reserve, especially since it appears that the opportunity to actually turn it into a park is coming nearer.
Mhm.
And it seems like we could go ahead and put an initial amount in, do some of the planning work that Phil described, and then determine, what is ultimately needed, but at least begin adding to it on an annual basis this year.
Okay. And I will look into this. Elizabeth and I were having a conversation about the Yendell property, I don't know, sometime in the last couple of weeks, as I was working on this. And Phil, you may know something different. My understanding, or what I thought Elizabeth was saying, is that there had been some discussion with like a nonprofit group that tries to kind of salvage things from houses, not a Habitat for Humanity, but something along those lines. And that she just wasn't sure where that stood, but she had a point of contact. So I don't know exactly how that organization came to be, but at least my impression from looking at the documents, and Phil, you probably certainly have more knowledge than I do, is that might have been what Elizabeth was referring to more than the family. I think the town may actually control what happens with that structure more than the family does, is my impression. But once again, I could be mistaken about that. Elizabeth also added that whichever nonprofit this was, we haven't heard from them in some time. And I think she told me that she could give me a point of contact to see if they're even still interested in that anymore. Phil, does that jive with what your understanding is, or
More
did I
or less.
misunderstand? Okay,
And the other person we need to talk to probably is Ken Ingham, because Ken Ingham basically is kind of like a transfer through. He's kind of providing interface with the family. And I
okay,
said the family only in a broad sense because I've heard several things swirling around, and definitely this nonprofit, like Community Forklift is another one I know of,
okay.
that would do this type of work. And so, yeah, we kind of need, I'm hoping to kind of get that framed up to understand what we think we're going to need to
Okay.
add.
Yeah, and if it would be helpful, Phil, I can share with you the documents that I found in Andrea's electronic files. I can send those to you.
Please
Okay.
do.
Anything else from anybody? What it sounds like is that there seems to be a consensus to maybe increase the amount of the operating reserve going into 2023 and to do the same for Yendel once we have a little bit more information. Is that kind of an accurate summary of where everybody's at?
I agree.
Okay. I'm
Yeah.
trying to be respectful.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah.
Okay.
To
Thanks for all
recap,
this
then,
analysis.
Yeah.
Sorry.
To recap, then we're looking at boosting in FY23. I do this for the budget team that's on the call.
Right.
You know, we're going from 175 up to 250, and that's on the reserve, exigency reserve. And the other one is for the Yendel reserve. We currently have 50, but maybe even just for a holding place, we put 25 in more. So we're at 75 for FY23, unless something else more specific comes. I just want to give them numbers to work with. Does that sound about right? Another 25 maybe, so we're at 75?
I would agree.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
And of course, council, you get to change all this later on. It's just something that the budget members, budget team can, you know, tee up, you know?
May shift further as we learn more about what's all involved. Like we probably need a perimeter fence at a minimum, and maybe
Right.
even a fence with a gate in the front. I don't know, but a lot of things probably to study and tally up. So
Okay.
What about ARPA? I know we haven't really, it wasn't on the capital or the reserves, but I know it's out there. I know we haven't designated or even talked about designating, but
Mhm.
how does that fit into all this?
Yeah, when you all did the mid-year budget adjustment back in November and December, basically ARPA was set up as a separate fund. So it basically is tracked entirely separate from the operating and capital. Once you all have determined what projects you want, we'll build out the line items there. But for right now, the budget basically, Phil, consists of the funding that we received with the first tranche. And then we had a placeholder amount. The only expenditure item that we initially included was the $30,000 for the shared ARPA project manager. You know, as we talked about at the last town council meeting, and I'll have a better idea after a webinar the state is putting on tomorrow about reporting, but I think with the state going, the Treasury Department going through from the interim to the final rule, the reporting process seems to be greatly simplified, and Donna may want to jump in because this is her area, I know. But I think the general consensus of talking to my colleagues is everyone might be able to manage the ARPA reporting on their own. I think we're all still sort of in a fact-finding mode, but I think we're learning a lot more right now. Donna, is there anything you wanted to add? Because I know this is something you've really delved into quite a bit.
No, that's as much information as I have as
Okay.
well. The reporting is not terribly onerous. However, having said that, I was under the impression that implementing said funds might be what would be the heavier lift here. So I guess after your fact-finding mission, and there's more details that come up, I guess we can discuss it, but that was my impression.
Okay, thank you, Donna.
And I'd like to just add, I don't really want this budget discussion to veer off into ARPA, because as Barb mentioned, and I just want to key this up again so that you all recall what we did for the mid-year, for the mid-year budget for FY22, as you know, we have a general fund, and this is what we're talking about tonight. We created, on the advice of the accountants, external accountants, a separate fund called the ARPA fund. So they are totally going to be separate for auditing purposes and reporting purposes. And I really don't want to kind of commingle this whole budget discussion with both, because they're going to be from the accounting side of the house, even our budget side of the house, we have separate budget reports. As you may recall, we drew up a template for you all in the January mid-year. But even for accounting, it's a separate, entirely separate audited book. Okay, just want to make clear that.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna, if no one has anything else, I'm gonna go ahead and move on. I'm trying to be cognizant of our kind of timeline. So kind of switching to the capital side of things. And as I mentioned, I had reached out to our maintenance staff and, you know, got some input. These projects seem to be of a rise to a level that I thought it was really worth to bring to your attention tonight. And I think Kaki shared with me earlier today that you may have heard about this first one, which is purchasing some new entry doors, you know, to the post office area, and talking to George. The current doors are kind of at the end of their useful life and maybe a little beyond that. And I know this is something that he and Andrea had talked about before. Because of the historic nature of Penn Place, and we were looking at having doors that have kind of the automatic openers, which I think is a really good thing to do just from a ADA standpoint. If nothing else, he did not find in his research very many companies that could actually kind of accommodate the width that we needed and the openers. In fact, based on George's research, there was one company. The anticipated cost, you know, including possibly some carpentry work that may need to be done to kind of accommodate the doors, but we're probably looking in the range of $30,000 to $35,000 to replace those entry doors. You know, George and I also discussed, and I know this somewhat relates to kind of what the ultimate scope of the town hall renovation is. But if you go to town hall and you really look closely at the exterior, it is not in very good shape. At a distance from the street, it is looking decent, but when you get to the side of the building or the back, it's not so great. What George has indicated, and I think he's quite eager to see this project move forward, is that it probably needs some new cedar plank siding. There'll probably be some trim work that needs to be done, painting the whole structure. These are kind of George's, you know, kind of best guess numbers. We obviously have not solicited any type of quotes since the project's not approved. But his estimate is that we could be looking in the range of $100,000 to $125,000 and possibly more. So I wasn't sure to what extent these projects have come up in your prior budget discussions and kind of what the level of interest was in funding them. I think Kaki, you have a comment?
I've got a question. Is it the town hall we're talking about, or is it Penn Place? Because I thought we were painting Penn Place, right?
We will be painting Penn Place as soon as I actually get the request for proposal done and out on the street. Okay, so it's actually both. Yeah.
Okay. All right. My apologies. Good.
No, it's a good question. Yeah, we have exterior work all the way around to some of our facilities.
George had painted it, or maybe it was Butch painted it in recent years, cleaned up the front a little bit.
He did.
When I've looked at that with them, I'm reasonably certain that that's not original siding. Mm-hmm. So it's probably replaceable. I think it just wore out at one point and was replaced. The north side may be original, but I think the south and the east are not. There's been a lot of changes over the years too, that kind of like the original historic details where the bell tower comes in and so on and so forth. So some of the exterior trim stuff could get intricate and we'll need like a historic area work permit, obviously. Yeah. So yeah, that's a pretty reasonable cost for it. That's sort of part and parcel of what is in the scope for taking a holistic look at town hall. So this would be a definite thing.
So that's my question, Stephen. It's a great segue. Should we be even contemplating painting this right now if we're looking to renovate the town hall? I mean, should we be contemplating painting the the town hall?
I wouldn't just yet. I don't think it's an emergency issue, or I think Penn Place needs it, and that one's not going to change configuration. But the town hall, like if there's more of a movement to put some of the original details back, it wouldn't make much sense to paint kind of what's there and then change it. You
Yeah,
know, even if it
Okay.
takes 3 years, I don't. It's not like the building's in dire straits for a 3-year window.
I don't mean to jump ahead and steal the thunder here, Barb, but I think you're actually going to get to some of the, these projects of what
Right.
should be done and what's the timeline for them. So now I'll be quiet.
No, I think that's a good segue. Like I say, I just wasn't sure how much these were on the radar screen. I do think the points you're making about, the timing of any exterior work at Town Hall is a valid one. I do know that, I think George is hoping to either have some definitive movement on the town hall renovation. I will just say as a layperson, and I don't have, I'm not an engineer like Phil, and I'm not an architect like Stephen. But when you go look at, Andrea took me over to town hall the few days that we overlapped, and we kind of walked around the building. When you do get to some of the sides, it is starting to look a little rough. So I encourage you, if you have, an opportunity, if you're over that way, just sort of check it out. And I think George's request, if you were on this call tonight, would probably be to say, let's try to tackle some of the exterior work sooner rather than later, as long as it's not, as long as it makes economic sense to do it.
Well, I'm going to throw a little monkey wrench into the works for a moment here. One of the things that I think we'll need to do at some point is probably put new insulation in it, if there is insulation, and
Okay.
to put in maybe some new wiring for additional electrical outlets, or rewire the ones we have existing, and blah, blah, blah. Anyhow, and Stephen's probably better off than could tell you more than I, but I would think that once we have the walls open, especially from the outside, because I re-insulated my house when I had it re-sided. And I think that's a perfect opportunity. You don't have to worry about screwing up the inside walls or cutting holes in them to have to patch them later, if you can do some of that work while the walls are open from the outside.
Right.
So I would like to throw that into the mix, is that I could see why it's going to be worth delaying a little bit to figure out what we're doing and where we're going.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's a good point, Phil, and it's definitely a way to do it. Like, done it with some other historic buildings in Maryland, where you rip off the siding. Granted, their old buildings are older than Town Hall, but take off the siding, put in modern insulation, and kind of seal it back up and correct the vapor barriers, so on and so forth. So yeah, that would make sense. We probably just need to have like some sort of a contingency plan. Like if for some reason, like we're held up more than a couple of years, then you just do a paint that's a holdover, which is what was done with the roof. There was a roof leak a couple of years ago. So it was really a basic roof was put on it. I think like $12,000, something like that, just to make sure that the asset is protected in the meantime. So
Right.
I was going to say, Barbie, you weren't here, but shortly after I became mayor, that was one of the first things we did was the town hall, at least front facade, was really looking really bad. And we went to work to at least improve the curb appeal, because we knew it'd be some time before we got to any big renovation. So,
Yeah.
All right.
If you don't have any other comments, I'm going to keep moving on. I'm trying to periodically look at my phone and keep track of the time. So this is kind of what Kaki was referring to, and I think I may kind of jump to another screen. Kaki, maybe you can give me some guidance about how you want to tackle this. But one of the things that I would just encourage you all to do is to kind of look at the capital projects. I don't know how recently that's been done in any kind of depth, but times change, and projects that you think you wanted to do at one time maybe fall off the radar screen and are no longer something that everyone's interested in. Certainly, I think it's important to sort of look at the funding that exists in for each of the capital project line items, and kind of determine as part of this budget process if there's some funding that you want to move between line items, just like you did, I think, at the mid-year budget adjustment. I think the point that was raised earlier is, are there things in operating that should be capital and things in capital that should be operating? Certainly is something we can review as we're bringing the budget to its fruition. And then lastly, and I guess I was talking to Kaki about this just as someone who's sort of new to the Garrett Park game. Certainly some of the line items, like for example, sidewalks is pretty self-evident about what that project is. There was another one that had to do with utilities and it has $108,000 in the account. And if you're someone like me who doesn't know the history that you all do, I would have no idea what that project was for and that it was about relocating poles. So I do think it might be a nice addition to the actual kind of budget process and document to maybe develop some narratives, so they don't have to be anything extensive for the capital line items. And perhaps that narrative could be tweaked every year, particularly if certain projects are funded in terms of what we're anticipating. So for example, for road maintenance or road paving, I think the title is sort of self-explanatory, but if we're including funding in the FY23 budget, I think it would be a nice addition to the process for our residents to basically say, here's the streets we're anticipating doing in FY 2023. Kaki and I were talking about the word transparency and how overused it is. But I think it's just a matter of, giving people a better idea of how their money is being spent by their local government. So just a couple of things that Kaki and I have been sort of kicking around. Kaki, at this point, do you want me to bring up, I'm trying to be cognizant of the time. Everyone had seen the January report. I can certainly screen share that if you think there's sufficient time to maybe delve into some of the capital line items, or do you want to kind of delay that discussion to a future date since we still have some items to get through tonight and we've got just about an hour?
Yeah, I think if we could put it in a parking lot and come back to it if we have time at the end.
Sure.
But I know we've got some big things yet to discuss.
Right. And I think they're going to take a little time.
Yeah, let's make sure we get to those. And then if we
Okay.
have time, we can come back because I'm sure some people have ideas and I already do on some of the capital budget line items.
Sure, that'd
Or
be great.
what we would call the management account structure.
Right.
I think there's some line items on the capital budget that aren't needed there.
Right.
I think it's always been confusing, but yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to keep moving.
Did
This
we
is sort
say-
of a preliminary discussion, but certainly, I'm sorry, Kaki, did you?
I just want to cite the time for occasionally, we're good at citing the time to mark the tape.
Right.
So it's 8:42 and just whatever you're about to talk about, just say the title of it so people kind of know where to look on if they want to play this back.
Sure, I will do that. I'm just jotting myself a note too, Kaki. So I think there's been certainly a lot of discussion about the current economic climate and the impact of inflation. So I did check with some colleagues, and as a local government, certainly a significant percentage of our operating costs are personnel related, and that's true no matter whether you're Garrett Park or you're Rockville or you're Baltimore City. Most of the neighboring jurisdictions, are in the very early stages of their budget process, just like we are. So very few people have actually decided what they're going to do as far as employee wage adjustments. Obviously, we need to, at least have some idea of what we're doing to be able to at least put a placeholder for budget establishment. I would say as probably an initial placeholder, I would recommend at least budgeting for a 3% COLA. The budget impact of that is about $9,700. That figure does include kind of the resulting, increases in Social Security, things that are basically salary driven, and then kind of reassess this as further information becomes available. I think it's a bit of a conundrum because on the one hand, we want to treat our employees well and recognize that there's inflation. On the other hand, salary increases are sort of forever. Inflation comes and goes. So, I think as a starting point, 3% is not an unreasonable number. And then certainly as the budget process develops, we can reassess that. I plan to keep in touch with some of the other municipalities to see what they're doing, and can share that information with you if you want to make an adjustment later on in the budget process. Guess any feedback about that or thoughts?
I absolutely support the conversation of at least 3%. I can tell you, I go through this daily with I work with a large staff and dealing with being competitive. And I'm not saying there's a risk of flight for Butch, but I hope people keep an open mind that there is a cost of living adjustment that should be recognized. And I do not think the cost of living is going to go down in this area anytime soon. So I would support at least 3%, that we can have a conversation beyond that if it makes sense.
Yeah.
If it allows.
Yeah, and if it's okay, I would second what, Mario was saying there, especially in going through some of our own wage negotiations where I work. It's quite clear that it's moving at an upward swing, which
Right.
I think is great.
So
Agreed. And I do think,
would-
Jackie, we should, I do think, I do think we should have the funds for, to look beyond that potentially. I mean, we're looking at almost just under 10,000 at 3%, it sounds like. Yeah,
I
so.
just want to reiterate that over the history of our staff's salaries, we have always been really generous with our COLAs increases. They've always been, they've been always 2.5 at least, if not 3.5. I think we've almost always been 3.5. And this is even in times when other governments, either county or state or federal, were not quite as generous. I'm just saying that so you all know. So when you realize we're doing a cost of living adjustment, we are building up a base. And people always have asked, all of us, well, why is the personnel budget item on your operating budget so expensive? Why is there such an increase? Well, this is why. We are always building in a COLA adjustment that affects the base salary, just so everybody knows. What hasn't happened much is actually the use of merit bonuses, merit performance pay, a one-time bonus for the year or mid-year or something, just putting that out as well.
Sure.
Just wanted to say that.
And just to kind of, I'm sorry. I don't know if that was
Sorry,
Shirley.
Barb. Actually, Kakia, that's an interesting point because I believe in the budget, we do have a line item for the regular salaries and a line item that can be used for bonuses, but I've never seen any follow-up as to when that bonus funding has been used and to what extent. So I think a little more transparency about the use of that funding would be helpful for us to understand, the value of that line item.
Yeah, I think if it's there, I guess, I'm not sure if it would be there in benefit. It might be under benefit line. I'm not aware that they've ever been given. Anyway, it's just, and we can look back and see if there were ever any increases that were specifically called out for potential merit pay.
Merit bonuses are, in my experience, are almost more appreciated than a raise. I would say, if of my staff, and I we all have, a lot of us manage folks, but I manage a big team, and merit raises or merit bonuses are often looked at because it's really a direct recognition of the work that's been done versus, not that a raise, it's all, anyway. I mean, if it's budgeted, and Shirley, you make up a good point. Let's not kick it to the curb. I agree with you, Kathy. Let's combination of something. I mean.
And I'm not arguing not to give the 3% because I know what our inflation is doing now, right?
Right, exactly.
So we can do a little homework. Well, we can do a little homework and see if anything's ever been put in the budget before. I'm almost certain nothing's been spent, but we can, these budget reports, as you see them every month at town council meetings, I mean, there are subline items in them that don't get put on the pages because they're just would take up multiple pages. So we'll go back, right? Barb will ask Mary.
Yes, I have it marked as a follow-up item. Yeah, and just to just briefly. So I ran like every COLA scenario known to mankind. And what I did is I looked at the numbers based on our four existing staff members. My assumption is that the mayor and town council would set the salary for the new town manager at whatever level you wanted, and he or she would not be eligible for a COLA, was sort of the assumption that I made. But each 1% in kind of a salary increase roughly has an additional cost of about $3,200 roughly is what each percent cost.
Yeah, about right.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess we have some preliminary guidance on that, so I'm going to keep on moving.
Can I ask a question really quick?
Sure.
I was just curious. I think we have like individual salaries listed in our budget. Is that normal or not so normal versus having like a total of salaries and having like individuals, like a more closed session?
What I would say, Stephen, is that technically any public employee salary is public information. And in fact, I just got a PIA request from an organization in Florida that basically just gathers salaries from all across the country, and they put them on the website, and there's a whole slew of them out there. So it's public information. I would say generally most local governments from a budgetary standpoint just sort of kind of roll everybody's salary up into one and do not publicize individual salaries, in my experience.
Thanks, I was forgetting about that part. So.
Yeah.
That's correct. That's how we usually do it.
Yeah.
It's always been one.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of, I'm sure there'll probably be a lot of discussion about this, but, before Andrea left, she and Kaki and I sat down and sort of got a update on, which projects were pending and where they were, but also Andrea shared some comments just about, kind of her thoughts on kind of where the organization was from a resource standpoint and ability to get projects done. And she was, quite candid about the fact that it was a struggle to kind of keep all the balls in the air, which isn't a surprise because the town manager in Garrett Park, really fulfills three different roles. One is certainly as the town manager and all the responsibilities that come with that. The position also functions as the treasurer and also functions as the town clerk. And I would say after being with you for about 3 months, I think I can, kind of speak to the challenges that Andrea faced, certainly not for as many years as she did. But I do think it's really challenging to kind of give appropriate attention to each of these fairly distinct functions. You can do a passable job and you get done what needs to get done, but it doesn't take very long to see the things that you wish you could get to and just simply can't from a matter of time. So, what Andrea had done in kind of recent years, was kind of utilized a series of contractors, after Debbie Sandlin, for example, finished up her stint as interim town manager while Andrea was on maternity leave. Debbie stayed around and helped Andrea with some projects. She's used, someone else for that. And then I think you all certainly were familiar with Joanne, who was with the town for dating back to Gene Swearengen's days, I believe. Originally was hired as the webmaster. I think as Andrea, was attempting to sort of keep up, and certainly Joanne is very talented. She also started expanding the role that Joanne played in some things. I think even with that, I think there's always going to be projects. I think when you leave a job that you wish you could have tackled. And I think Andrea certainly flagged some of those. One was, getting the code in electronic format. She kind of got through part of that project with, Joanne's help. But I think one of the areas that, is really challenging, I think, with our staffing is procurement. And I'm finding that myself. It does take time to write RFPs, make sure, and do all the follow-up and handle the bidding process. And I think that was a challenge for Andrea, and candidly, I'm finding it as a challenge as well. So I did some, after Andrea and Kaki and I talked, and then Kaki and I had some further conversations. I reached out to some of the smaller towns. Some of their staffing I was familiar with just from having worked in the county for a number of years. Others I wasn't. But the town of Chevy Chase does have an assistant town manager position, Chevy Chase Village. has a position entitled Director of Municipal Operations that somewhat functions as an assistant town manager, that is not the title, but more specifically, the Director of Municipal Operations in Chevy Chase Village basically handles a lot of their procurement functions for them. The next one was not actually in the information that's posted on the website or I gave you. It just happened to fall into my lap this afternoon, that the village manager for Friendship Heights sent a note out to all of us saying, hey, if you know anybody, I'm getting ready to hire an assistant village manager. So they do have a position as well. Kensington has both an assistant to the town manager, a slightly different title, and a clerk treasurer. And then Poolsville in their FY 2022 budget, they have not hired anyone yet, but budgeted an assistant town manager position for the first time, is my understanding. So I think having an assistant town manager position, isn't uncommon, I think, among the smaller municipalities in Montgomery County. So as Kaki and I kind of tried to sort through sort of where the need maybe most was and where we could use staffing dollars perhaps the most efficiently, we sort of arrived at this assistant town manager / town clerk position. We would envision this position, if approved in the budget, as performing what I call traditional, town clerk duties. Those are things like, doing the minutes for the town council meeting, making sure that documents post-meeting get signed and posted to the website and things of that nature.
Drafting ordinances.
Making sure that after, if there's an ordinance that basically requires the code to be changed, that the code stays updated. I have picked up the digital project and I'm close to signing a contract for that. So hopefully we'll be able to pick up where Andrea left off and get that going. I certainly think the town manager is always going to have to be involved in procurement. I think, it's just a big job. But I would see this position, if approved, assisting the town manager with some of the procurement functions. Certainly other administrative work, which sometimes Andrea had, had outsourced, including doing some research, some policy drafting, things of that nature. And then this was one that I know is important to Kaki in particular, but helping with some project monitoring, including, maybe going out and occasionally doing some, inspections in the field when we have some construction projects. We're not looking at hiring someone who's an engineer, but they could certainly, respond if they're, a neighbor has a concern about a project, someone would be available to go out and take a look at that. So those were kind of some of the functions that, we sort of anticipated this position could perform. Included in your materials for this evening's meeting, was a draft job description that I had prepared with, Kaki's feedback. So obviously the big question is, what would something like this cost? Included also in your packet were kind of the salaries for the positions we just talked about, and they kind of range. You've got a fairly high level assistant town manager position in the town of Chevy Chase, and I'm not suggesting that we pay at that level. But I do think we would want to set the salary at a level where we could hopefully draw somebody who has an MPA degree, which is sort of the standard in local government management. These days, it's almost a minimum requirement. Maybe has 2-3 years of experience, so they would bring something to the table. They're not starting out totally raw, coming out of school. But the cost of the position, I kind of assumed a potential starting salary in the range of $75,000 to $85,000, kind of in the middle of the pack of the positions that I gave you as examples. Including benefits, we'd probably be looking at $100,000 to $110,000. We have, there would be some offsetting savings from not using contractors, not, replacing the position that was held by Joanne. That's not significant. There would still be a net, cost impact, and I don't want to gloss over that. But in recent years, when I went back and looked, we've been spending anywhere from like $10,000 to $30,000 on these outside consultants or contractors. As I mentioned very early on in this presentation, we will have some budgetary savings in FY 2023 from paying off the Penn Place debt. That amount, once again, is about $62,000. And certainly budgeting is about making choices. So because the Penn Place debt goes away, it's up to you all as the policymakers to decide if this is the type of addition to the FY 2023 budget that you'd like to apply those funds towards. I guess, Kaki, anything else you wanted to jump in, I hope?
Yeah, actually not very much, but because I think you laid it out really well, but I wanted to give even more examples of things that Barb and I had talked about that this position could do, and she included it in the packet that is the FY23 budget proposed new position. It's the very last page, and it's a table that she shows what the task is, and then who the current staffing person was responsible for at the time, and then where that task would be reassigned to or redelegated to. And so there's some other things in here that aren't in the PowerPoint that are also really critical, which includes really the town elections and also the website. There's an awful lot that goes on with the town website for posting information and news and stuff that we just never seem to get it right. And this person would take responsibility for that as well. And I think we had the official town record, record, the record management official. Sorry. So there is plenty. That's why there's not enough time to, you get one procurement action and you spend time on that, and everything else, it's a one-man shop. It's really hard to do, especially when people are saying, why aren't we spending the money?
Right.
We don't have staff to do it. And even contracting out to get support staff to do it, you never know. First of all, that takes more time. Secondly, that those things can change, and you do want institutional knowledge and you want continuity of operation. And we didn't say it, but this is a position that could also become, groomed for the next level should the town manager, decide to go. We've never had somebody who could step in. It's also when there's a town manager who wants to take a week vacation, who's the person to be acting?
Yeah.
Right. And, that there's all those kinds of things. I don't think it's asking for a lot. And I think you've heard maybe over the years, even before I became mayor, there had been talk about trying to hire another staff person. So here we are.
Yeah, and I think Donna has her hand up, I can tell. Donna?
Yes, thank you. First off, apologies for not being on camera. My computer died. I put myself on my phone and I can't seem to figure out the camera. So you'll forgive my blinking in and out. But I'm frankly, I have experience with procurements, etc., and I'm actually shocked that that workload is on the same person who's the town manager in general. Yeah, because I'm so surprised, I would be more than supportive. However, having said that, I'm wondering if this would this person, and I don't mean to add on to people's workload, of course, would this person be like available for ARPA, or just helping move that along?
I'm going to defer to the mayor, but I think I viewed this position as sort of helping to pick up some of the special projects work, and I think that could fit into it. Kaki, would you agree?
I think that's a good choice of words. And Donna, it always depends on what that is, right? I mean, I can't, I don't know what it is you're thinking you would need, but that's, and that's between the town manager and what this assistant town manager would discuss about, who splits the roles and how, so I would defer.
Like, for instance, I had in mind submitting reports. I mean, something that simple, just making sure there's an archive of it and it's
oh yeah,
so saved,
right.
etc.
And so in my mind, yeah, that goes like to grant reporting.
Right.
Mhm.
or, like when we, gosh, the SRTS, all that, oh my goodness. So yeah, I could definitely see where somebody, that person's role would also take on that reporting part. We don't have that assistance from, shared position across municipalities that I don't know where that is anymore yet, so.
Jackie, and Barbara, there's no question about the workload. My only question and is we currently have, and this is an awkward question to ask in a public setting with it's being recorded, but we currently have two. You're filling in the moment, Barbara, and you.
Right.
By the way, I wish you would stay forever because I think you're terrific. But but I know you have other plans for your life. But you're a full-time employee. Elizabeth is a full-time employee. What can you define for me Elizabeth's role that she's filling in that she can't do this? Because it's important to understand. Like, I'm not opposed to a third person. Like, I think it makes sense in a lot of ways. But I want to be clear that we, I think we all go through this who are in the hiring front on our various organizations. You have to justify
Correct.
the current staff before you can move on to adding staff. And I'm not opposed to adding a third by any stretch at all. But I want to be clear that we're maximizing effort by everyone we have currently on a payroll. Is that a fair question?
I think it's an incredibly fair question, and I think it's certainly one, Maria, that's appropriate to ask. I think Elizabeth has her own workload. I think in terms of the office, and I think she also, I'm sorry, Jackie.
Yep, there is a phone number person sitting on the call. I'd like them to identify themselves. It's 202-441-3990. Could you all take yourself off mute and tell us who you are, please? There's a number 202-441-3990. Could you tell us who you are, please? Okay, Barbara, could you go ahead and hang that person up? That's what we've had to do in different meetings.
Okay, I can.
That person should be able to tell us who they are. Oh wait, there's a chat. Who is this? No, I don't think it's anybody.
No, I
who's
think
chatting.
that was Donna.
Yeah. Okay. I think we have to hang that person up if they're not coming forward to tell us who they are.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just drop the screen share for a minute then, Kaki, because I think I need to get out to the participants. Okay. To do that.
Sorry, people. I've been meaning to ask them before we get too far.
No, it's a fair. I agree, Kaki.
And we have to be careful about any real personnel issues, right? So
Right.
Agreed.
We-
No, agreed.
Separate
Totally
forum. Yeah.
agreed. Yeah, no, agreed. And again, it's and I know when
I would say for Barb.
I'll wait for Barbara. My question was not with the intention of my question was not to look for some nefarious, sneaky reason to blame someone for anything or like find fault or find anything. He's like, just want to be clear, like, hey, what's her role? And is there more is there more bandwidth? That's all.
No, I think that's a very fair question.
There isn't bandwidth, and it's a full it is a full load.
Mhm.
And she is maxed out, and there's we also have what we have because of also the skill sets. So
Yeah, and I
so
think
if you want to say anything more.
Yeah, I think, Kaki, if I can add a little bit. So for those of you who don't know, Elizabeth basically manages all the town hall reservations, which can be a bit of a job. I think they're certainly picking up. Elizabeth is the person who receives a lot of the permits that are basically filed with the town, make sure those get routed to the land use committee, make sure, she did that today, make sure that I sign permits. So she sort of corrals that aspect of the town's operations. She does a lot of constituent related work. She basically is the primary person who answers the phones. Elizabeth has a wealth of institutional knowledge, certainly both, having grown up in the town, now living here again, and also just having worked for the town for so many years. But, basically a lot of constituent assistance and help. So that's probably not everything, but that's I list
Right,
some of
right.
the.
No, I get it.
functions
And I
of
think the
funds.
skill set we're looking for this is very different from Elizabeth's
It
skill set.
is.
I'm not saying,
It
that
is.
in fact, I would argue that she's not qualified for this additional role,
Right.
but I want to make sure that, there's space for,
Right.
I think you clarified it. And again, I'm all for it. I mean, I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that we're maximizing everyone's effort. That's all.
And I want to just also reassert, the vital role that Elizabeth does play. I mean,
Yes.
trying to keep the trains running in the office, and her constituency service,
It's wonderful.
to residents. You can't find that. So, and you can't find it, you can't replace it, and it's also pretty darn hard to hire. So
Yeah.
it's a real critical role that she plays, and that takes time too.
I know Jerry has a hand up. I just want to say, I love Elizabeth. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
This is not about, so I just want to be, we're having an honest conversation about workload and and job responsibilities. That's all I'm asking. So.
No, and I think, Mario, you shouldn't feel, what you've asked is a very valid question and one that should be discussed before any organization adds staff. I think one other function that we probably didn't mention is we have a massive amount of paper like any local government does, and those files are Elizabeth's, from the permits to the financial records. Everything is kind of her bailiwick. I appreciate the question, Mario. I think it was actually a helpful discussion for everyone. Anyone else have any thoughts about this? Because obviously it would have a big impact.
Sure. Hey, Barb. This is Jerry Lee. So to tag on to Mario's comment, I think I would want to have more information before I could make an informed vote on this question. Because to me, it's not just about Elizabeth's position, it's about all the other consultants that the town has been using.
Right.
And also, I understand that I'm blanking out on his last name, George, was hired not long before I joined the council. And it's a little murky and unclear to me what his position and duties are. So honestly, I think it would be really helpful if you could expand the matrix you created to show all the town positions, everyone's duties, the number of hours per week that each have, and for our benefit, the salary that each is paid and the average for those who are consultants. I think this kind of information should be available to us anyway, in terms of our responsibilities for managing the town. But I just don't know how we could vote on the addition of an additional staff person without really fully understanding the staff and the consultant support that we're currently paying for.
Sure. I think that's a very fair request, Shirley.
Okay, well, I'm also gonna insert here, because I do not want this to go. And Jerry Lee, you might be the only other one besides Barb who knows this language about the FAIR Act, but we are not parsing out functions. And I think that is what is typical when you look at functions, positions, utilization, what can be, commercialized, what needs to be staying in-house is inherent. We're not going to go there. We're not going there. So when you ask about, what you ask, which is appropriate for a large organization, we got 3 staff members who manage the grounds and the buildings and the trucks, equipment, maintenance. I mean, George does a ton of that stuff that none of the other 2 can do. And we made that argument, and that's what he does do. And the occasional to run out to check a project that's going on, infrastructure wise, occasionally. But most of his time is used that way. And I'm not going to get further into that. We have no other consultants other than Mary does accounting, and that's necessary. And we don't have anybody else. Joanne is gone. I am not going to be trying to justify or parse out functions. And, I'm sorry that you may not think that there's enough information for you to go on about what's needed in a town office. But if you've ever run operations, you would know what we're talking about. And we've been talking about this for years. Even before I became mayor, it was being pushed by the former mayor. So, you know, functions, responsibilities have only grown, and you're seeing it as evidence across all municipalities. And we've actually mentioned that before. And we mentioned that the town attorney has even said, this is where towns are going. They're parsing out, they're seeing, you know, the realization of work, town clerk separate from a town manager and an assistant town manager if we need one. You know, so we're not asking for all of that, but we're asking for one more person. And the fact is that the operations are incredible. And I spend enormous amount of time doing work, 4 to 8 hours every day. And I'm just floored that we even have to have a conversation about this, and that you're asking for information that is for a large organization. I was a CFO and a CEO at a federal bureaucracy, and I came up the ranks doing that same kind of work. So I know what goes into that stuff. And we're asking for a position where we have 3 staff that are out in the field and we have a secretary. You know, stop and think, step back, take a breath, as I'm going to do right now, because I feel my voice tightening and I don't mean to. But let's just put this in perspective. We're not gigantic. So, you know, we can still provide you, you know, the hourly, not the hourly, we can provide you the salary ranges that we keep looking at and tracking, because, you know, there is incredible base growth every year for COLA. But when you look at that compared to other town municipalities, we're sort of right there with them for ranges of salary. So we're not here to actually reassess their current pay. A number, as again, I mean, let's step back and think about what this question is, because I'm not going there, Jerry Lee, and I'm just saying it right now, because I've been there. This organization
Thank you,
is too tiny.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Jackie. I hear you. I think you may have misunderstood my question because I was not asking
Oh,
about
no.
the Fair Act.
You
I'm
brought
really-
it before. You brought it up before, Jerry Lee.
Jackie, let Jerry.
I've not brought up the Fair Act before. So Mario, I'd like
No,
to finish,
I didn't
please.
say you brought up
Mario,
the Fair Act.
I'd like to
Fair
finish,
Act.
please.
No, no,
Okay, so
said
as
that.
I said, I am asking simply for clear, organized information about the town's current staffing and consultant profile. And I'd like to be a little more clear, not current at this moment, right? Perhaps the last few years, I'd say 5 years, since during the COVID years, it's a little, you know, you couldn't call that average, right? So I just think that would give us full information. And we do have other consultants. We used a legal consultant. We used a project manager for a short time.
Because we had
We
nothing.
have the
Yeah.
arborist, who's also a consultant.
Mhm.
So I just think that
Yeah.
would give us a full
That's fine.
picture before we make a
Okay.
vote. The other
And I'm
question
going
I
to say
have for you,
this.
Barb,
Excuse me.
excuse me,
Excuse me.
Kathy, I'm speaking. Could you please
No,
let me
no,
finish?
I'm chairing the
Kathy,
meeting. I'm chairing the
could you
meeting.
please
Excuse me,
let me finish?
Jerry
I
Lee.
think
I'm the chair
I
of the
deserve,
meeting.
this is a town council meeting, and I deserve to be able to have my say and ask my questions. Please
But
be
just a
respectful.
second. Oh,
Please be
Oh.
respectful.
please be
So Barb,
respectful of the chair.
My second question, Barb, is when you consulted the other towns, did they give you information about what other staff they have besides an assistant to the town manager position? Because to me, just knowing that they have an assistant or a deputy doesn't really give me the full picture of
Sure.
how many total staff they have or how many consultants they use to staff similarly sized municipalities. So thank you for your assistance.
Sure. And Jerry, I do have some of that information. My focus, and I can certainly expand that if that's what the group would like, but my focus was really more on staff that performed more administrative functions, because obviously someone who's more in the public works or the maintenance field isn't going to be able to help fill the need that I think Kaki and I are speaking to. But if you're wanting to see sort of the full complement, a couple of the municipalities that I spoke to, I asked if I could get a copy of their either their org charts or their kind of pay plan structure. So some of that information I have in some cases, but yeah, my focus was primarily kind of who was helping to handle some of the administrative functions. But I can go back and look and see what I have.
Thank you.
Sure. And Jerry, can I ask one other clarifying question? Certainly, as Kaki was alluding to, we have, people that we use as consultants who are, legal staff, for example, which, any city that's not a Rockville would never have in-house counsel. Are you interested in those type of consultants or more the consultants that would be relevant to this particular position request?
Well, for example, one of the duties you mentioned, potentially asking this person to work with, is things related to drafting ordinances or resolutions. And that's something that I had previously assumed that we used our town attorney for. So I was just a little curious as to, what kind of, support they have across the board.
Sure. And I think it probably depends on what it is. If it's something like the budget ordinance that I think is essentially the same from year to year, I imagine at some point the town attorney looked at that, and then it just becomes a matter of updating, dates and numbers. I can tell just from correspondence that I've seen when you all were doing the charter amendments, for example, back in 2020 and 2021, specifically dealing with voting by mail, for example. I don't know this for a fact, but just looking at the way that was written, I would be shocked if that wasn't drafted by Ron Bolt, or at least reviewed by him and edited by him.
No, so there's totally different thing, right? We draft them.
Right.
Andrea drafted them. Even if she had to get a template from another town,
Right.
we drafted them. Then we had the attorney review them. And I'm sorry if I lost my temper, Jerry Lee, but one of the things I know by this charter is that there is an operations executive branch and there's a legislative branch. And when you ask for information, I'm wondering what you're doing with it. Because what I fear is that, and Andrea was big on this, as well as Jean Swearingen, operations is the operations side of the house. As long as they're, we're doing things that are efficient, productive, legal, you're not really there to tell us how to operate the office. Okay. I just want to make that point. So if you think that there's something valuable in getting this additional information other than just for information, I'd love to know it. Because you're not the IG.
Kaki, I think
I just want to make sure you realize you're not the Inspector General.
I believe all town residents deserve to have full information about the operations of our government, because we're spending their money to operate our government.
And
the
I agree,
legislative
and I never
branch
said
has
I never
oversight of the executive branch, and you
what?
are asking us for an
No, you
increase in the
don't.
budget. So it is
No,
our
you
job
don't.
to do due diligence and understand what we're voting for.
Okay, the legislative
Thank you
branch
for your
in the
apology.
charter does not say that. You do not have oversight of the operations. Don't confuse what you're reading. You set regulation, you set policy, but you don't have oversight of operations. That's our job. Let's just be clear. Go back and read it. I'm the CEO, a non-paying CEO of this town.
Yeah, if I may, I know, Mario has a call to get onto it in about 10 minutes. Yeah, so I just don't want to hold anyone up. We're almost done, but I guess I also just wanted to see, for those of you who kind of haven't weighed in on this issue, if you have just any thoughts you'd like to share, or
Steven has his hand
questions.
up. Steven has his hand up.
I'll be quick. I think, Barb, you started kind of answering what my question was about,
Okay.
I think a few minutes ago, but it's helpful to kind of see the research you've done on other towns. But I guess the thing that wasn't totally clear to me is like the kind of the scale difference between Garrett Park and those. Like, I'd love to kind of know, I think the Chevy Chases in Kensington, I know, are at least twice as big as we are. I think Poolsville is probably twice or more,
Right.
which, while that's good, maybe we, could find out maybe they have 10 people and we have 5 or whatever it is. But I'd be kind of curious to kind of see how we look and scale if we're understaffed or overstaffed, or if we're right in line, because it's probably not super linear going up by population. It may be like a minimum kind of before you get a marginal increase in a person, but that would be helpful, I think, to know what's that total and kind of what functions they have in general, because we are asked as the council to kind of like validate a budget, and this is a pretty big kind of commitment to the budget. So I'd like to I feel irresponsible, kind of just doing it without having any idea what the scale is. So thank
Okay.
you.
That's a good question, Stephen. I was on the Maryland Municipal Compensation System, and Barb and I have talked about this. I mean, it's unfortunate that the system isn't developed to the level of sophistication to allow you to do, you know, crosstab matching of, you know, a demographic and population, tax base and all that to staff. It's also unfortunate that the system itself doesn't include a lot of the towns in the Montgomery County system. So I've made some suggestions that they try to start capturing that so that we can get to that level, because, you know, I wanted to be able to compare apples to apples, because you can see salaries for all staff, payroll staff, but unfortunately you can't match it against, you know, what else they are. But that hopefully will be coming. But it's a great question.
It's just hard because I think the infrastructure varies by town. I think we're probably bigger than like a Washington Grove, and they probably have less infrastructure, but we have far less infrastructure than Kensington down the road.
Sure.
Let alone the number of residents is double, but I think their infrastructure is probably 10 times ours, so more than 10. So
but
yeah, it's hard to
remember,
scale.
right, but remember, you're getting down to what is, you know, sort of base utilization of staff.
Sure.
You know, so there's just and expectations of residents too, like, you know, why aren't we getting such and such done? Yeah.
Okay.
So I'd like to jump in. We would have to modify the charter, as I understand, in order to split the clerk from the treasurer position.
That's a good question, Phil, and that's kind of where I started at. I think it could be handled one of two ways. You know, one is to, you know, actually amend the charter, which, you know, has its own process associated with that in non-emergency times, to actually kind of recognize that there's a, you know, a separate town clerk, because the clerk treasurer position is recognized. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, Kaki, you would probably be the person who could, but I actually, in reviewing the charter and the code, actually don't even see the town manager position recognized. I believe it was originally formulated as a clerk treasurer, and that's what's specifically in the charter. The other way of handling it, Phil, if you know, we felt like the charter was too cumbersome, you know, it could simply be a delegation of duties. So in other words, and this was actually when Kaki and I talked about this, this was something, you know, she noted, you know, technically you could have the town manager, you know, by charter service, the clerk treasurer, but he or she could sort of delegate the clerk duties just like they could delegate any type of responsibility to another staff member. So I think there's two different ways to handle that.
But I'm not positive on that, Barb, because you know, the clerk treasurer is called out by title and responsibility in the charter by itself.
Right.
And it's one that actually is appointed by me, but approved by council.
Okay.
The difference is the town manager. It doesn't exist as a title in the charter anywhere, but it does allow the mayor to go ahead and appoint heads of departments, which we've always said, well, the operations, town office operation is a department, you know, so that's how, you know, you are hired.
Right.
Unfortunately now, you know, it's like the clerk has gotten busy. Then you've got the treasurer, clerk treasurer. The treasurer is supervised by the mayor and helps, you know, formulate and helps present the budget, which now you do as well.
Right.
You know, so, and that's become quite a, you know, big process too, if you want to do it right, actually, you know, with formulating and trending and analysis. We don't always get to that, but we did it a few years ago, and I hope Tabor is going to have that handy for next Monday or Tuesday, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think the critical piece of getting that resolved is, I know, like, you know, it's nothing super significant, but like the meeting minutes after they're approved are signed by me as the town clerk. So there are those functions performed by the town manager where you're
Mhm.
actually executing documents as the clerk as opposed to the town manager. So Ron Bolt
Right.
may have an opinion of, how that should be handled, assuming if this position were to be approved in the budget.
I know Ron has said, really to keep it clean, it's probably best to have an amendment to the charter. But
Yeah.
paper can often follow the action. Paper is often behind
Yeah.
in the action. Action is first, then we follow with paper. You'll hear that every place. Oh, it's coming, paper's coming.
Yeah, so I jotted down, some of the data request, I guess, just before we move on, because we're almost at the end. Are there any other comments or questions or information requests that anyone has?
Just a super quick comment that may help. The reason that my understanding of why the charter has and the ordinance has clerk treasurer is that's the historic term. It was in there for years. And even when I moved into town in 2009, we had a town clerk and a previous mayor. I think it was either when Gene Swearingen started or after he started, it was proposed to kind of elevate that position to be a town manager versus a clerk. So we just never really had the clerk. I don't know if it's required because like you're saying with like certain duties are supposed to be like a clerk versus a manager. I don't know if that matters, as a formality, but that's kind of where it came from. So it was kind of like the one position became the other. It wasn't that we didn't really have manager. So anything that's in, like I have it up next to me here, like the ordinance is anything that says manager, it's something that's been updated in the last 5-6 years.
It's in the ordinance, Stephen, but the charter itself is clerk treasurer. The clerk reports to the council.
Okay.
That's what it says. The treasurer, and it was a dual hatted, reports to the mayor. So before Gene was town manager, there was Ted Pratt, who was town administrator.
I forgot it's administrator.
And before Ted, then there was, I don't know if Glenda came in, if Ted replaced Glenda, or if there was an interim period where there were a couple of substitutes in there for a little while, but Glenda was a clerk treasurer. That was her title, Glenda Ingham. So it just sort of morphed into this bigger thing. And,
yeah, in my experience, regardless of where you are in the country, particularly I think for smaller municipalities, many of whom don't have a manager, the term clerk treasurer is fairly prevalent. I remember seeing it, all over the place, and especially in like, southern Missouri, southwestern Missouri, where there were a lot of small communities. It's a fairly common job description and title. I've jotted everything down. If there's not any other discussion about this, I'm going to go ahead and move on, and we're close to kind of wrapping up. So if you can just give me a minute. I need to get my glasses on.
While you're doing that, Keki and Barbara, what's the next step on this then? I mean, just want to clarify. So obviously we didn't come to a resolution on the third employee. So what would be the next? It would be have to decide at the next meeting.
Kaki, do you want to take that, or?
Is that a fair question? I'm just curious.
I mean, I've gotten a sense from the council that
Right.
I'm not sure if I got a sense from the council, because I would say if there were at least 3 people, we'd at least build it into the budget, so we got the numbers to present to you.
Right.
In the meantime, as Jerry Lee has requested, we can provide some further background information. If that
But we're not
helps
taking
too.
votes. We're not taking. We're not making any motions. This is not a meeting to take motions, correct, Barb? Right.
Correct.
Right. Okay. That's what I'm clarifying. Okay.
I mean, we
I mean,
can.
not
It's a
officially.
public meeting and it's policy. You can, but we also want to get I'm sorry, we're kind of jumping to the end of the question, Mario and Barb.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I'm jumping in, but
Not at all. Go ahead, Kaki.
you and I have talked, we still want to hope for intro of an FY23 budget in March. And I think Barb has the timeline on her PowerPoint maybe.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to come up there.
So with the expectation we'd be able to have an introduction on March and then an adoption in April, unless you don't care. And then it becomes a May town council with a brand new council, maybe, who would then have to approve it or whatever we do.
Yep. No, I mean, shouldn't take.
So it's a tight fit, Mario. That's all I'm getting at. And the budget committee is going to be working to provide, to tee up some numbers. And we haven't really even had a chance to talk with them about their agenda and,
What's the date of the March meeting? Barb, do you have that?
It's
It's
the
not down here.
14th. Yeah, it's, hopefully you can see the screen. Can everyone see that?
No,
It's not back
no,
yet.
I don't see
It's not
it.
up.
All right, I'm
So
gonna
that's
shut
always-
up. I'm gonna keep quiet. You keep going, Bob. I texted my team. I told them I'll be on at 9:45. So
Okay.
but I do have to get off this call. I really apologize. I got like a idiotic crew of moronic people trying to.
Don't forget, Mario.
Well,
we're being
if they were
recorded.
on this meeting, I hope they hung up. Whoever that
One question,
anonymous
Barb.
caller was.
On the agenda, we had originally set aside time to talk about council priorities, and obviously we're
Right.
running out of time.
Right.
Would you propose that we email to the group priority topics so that the budget committee can consider those and you guys can take that into account? I just want to make sure that we have an information
Right.
plan for that kind of information.
Yeah, I think, and Kaki jump in here. I think the challenge, Jerry Lee, as I see it, is, each one of you could certainly, share what your priorities are. If I were one of the members of the budget work group, those are obviously individual priorities, but not reflective of the group priorities. I think that's the challenge. You all really can't communicate with each other over email about things because that would be viewed as kind of circumventing the Open Meetings Act, because that's essentially a discussion that should be public. So I don't know, Kaki, if you have any thoughts. I know one of our. Kaki, I think you froze up a little bit there.
I begin again because of, maybe I'm better. If you can see me, hear me.
We can hear you.
Can you see me, hear me?
Yes, we can see
That's
you.
I don't hear you. Oh, okay, good.
You'll see Gianna's done.
No, I like Jerry Lee's. I like Jerry Lee's suggestion. There were a bunch of work done a couple of years ago, and we have that kind of documented about what the priorities were that back then. One of the things I think Barb had hoped to get to, I don't know if it's time to get to it, but you could probably also put it in an email, each council member, is what specific projects you think you might want to see done in FY23. And if we can find any common projects or themes, we can include them as part of a budget justification for budget members. Not to say that individual ones that are like outliers are off the table, because you all are going to have a chance to discuss this in March at the March Council. And we'll hope that there's not too much of a deviation, because really a lot of it is budget line items that are vague anyway, and you're putting money in. So, but I think it's a good idea at this point in time to be able to send in what you think are your priorities, rank them, and then give an idea of your timeline when you think you'd want to see those started, even if they overlap fiscal years.
Right.
Right. If they start in next spring and they are not done, it just gives everybody a sense of how much work is expected and time crunch of getting it done.
Yeah, so I think it's fine, just to kind of add on to what Kaki said, to, email your priorities. I think it's perfectly appropriate to copy your colleagues so they're aware of, what your interests are. Where you just need to be careful is not to start any kind of back and forth over email regarding what you put in your email, if that makes sense, because that's where the Open Meetings Act becomes an issue.
Barb, is it something where we could all email them to you individually, and maybe you put it together as one combined document and send it out back to all of us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
As long as there's no discussion about it.
Yeah, I think, what Stephen is suggesting is it would just come to me. I would suggest copying Kaki on that as well. And then we can sort of put together kind of a matrix of what came in and get that back out to you.
Or even if it's just raw, kind of like, eight, the 5 in a row, whatever it is. So that way we could all kind of see the information and have something to discuss at the March meeting. So
and get an idea, Stephen, of when you think you'd want to see it done. Started at least. Because then there's all the stuff you got to do ahead of time that a manager would have to do ahead of time to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense, everybody? You okay with that?
That's what my picture is. That was me planning a project in Hawaii. So putting together, there was like a $50 million capital plan. So,
Does that sound good to everybody? Just to kind of do that. And like I said, I took notes with any of the information requests and I'll, start working on those tomorrow.
That sounds good. Timeline for submission to you, Barb and Khaki?
I would probably say khaki by Monday morning, you think? No?
No, I would say till like, I was gonna say Friday, but not this Friday, next Friday. Let me look
Okay.
at my calendar, okay? Because I know the budget meeting, the budget committee is just starting to get together, and there's a big,
Right.
they're supposed to have the meeting on Monday. I don't know if that still is gonna happen, because Tuesday, I really want them to attend the PALS meeting where they're gonna get introduced
Right.
to the modeling, and they're gonna see some of the trend analysis, if I have it. And I can also mail that to all of you once we get it. Once we get the trend analysis updated, if you remember from 4 years ago, it was in 2019, I did all the analysis and the trends and graphs, and it was very visual, and I'm getting that updated again. So you're going to see history of revenue, and I don't know if I did operations. I think it was just all on revenue, actuals and projections and stuff like that. Let me look at here. We are at the 23rd, and if I said, so we have a March meeting on the 14th, and yeah, well, I guess if you don't mind me saying this, moving it up a day to the 3rd could be a deadline maybe for y'all to, certainly if you send it sooner, that's fine, but I think if you wanted to try something, you think the 3rd?
Yeah, I was actually thinking khaki maybe a little bit earlier, because even though we're looking at introducing the budget ordinance on the 14th, we have to have
Yeah.
numbers that actually go in there.
I know. Right.
So, I mean.
All right, then how about the 2nd?
Yeah. I mean,
week
I
from
would
today.
say, yeah.
March
I mean, I
2nd,
imagine most
yeah.
of you are pretty busy, and probably just with your work schedules. So, I think the sooner the better, but no later than the 2nd.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I guess any last words, Khaki, before you adjourn the meeting, or?
No, it's just that it's been extremely rough, and I apologize for losing my temper. I shouldn't have done that. But for anybody who got on late, I want to again give my appreciation to all of you who were thinking of me and my family, and for the flowers and for the cards. I really appreciate it. And Barb, I think you did an outstanding job, and I have the time of 9:41. Not bad.
Yep. Okay, well, listen, thank you again, everybody, for your time, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Mario, the rest of us are going to relax, and it sounds like you've got work to do, so sorry for that.
No, it's okay. It's the happy has the head that wears the crown, right? No worries, it is. No worries.
Okay.
Thank you. This is
Good evening,
very,
everybody.
thank you.
Thanks all.
All
Bye-bye.
right, thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Bye-bye.